Go and stand on the mountain, in the quiet. I, the Lord, the All-Powerful, want you to be there when I pass by. Wait and listen for my presence. I'm not in the wind, or the earthquake, or the fire. No, I am a soft whisper in the gentle breeze. I am with you.
Well, good morning, NorthPoint. It's always good to see you. And I got something to get out of the way first this morning. Congratulations to all the Kansas City fans that are here. Yeah, some cheers this morning. So, okay. And condolences to any Philadelphia Eagles fans. I don't know if you knew this, but apparently Philadelphia has lost 3 major sports championships in the last 4 months. They lost soccer, they lost baseball, the World Series, and they lost the Super Bowl. So I think Philadelphians just need some Jesus love this morning. So if you're here and you just need the love of Jesus, we want to bring that to you and encourage you today. But for those of you that are Kansas City fans, you're flying high right now because it also makes a point from last week's message even more poignant, because now not only is Patrick Mahomes the $450 million man, but he is also a 2-time Super Bowl winner, the Super Bowl MVP, the regular season MVP. And if you've trusted in Jesus, you still have more than Patrick Mahomes has, because of your relationship with God and able to call him your father. So I know some of you are like, yeah, but I would be Patrick Mahomes. But I would take that. And I get it, like the fame, the fortune, the wealth, the get to go anywhere, do anything you want to do, be on top of the world. That would be pretty cool for a while. But then I know something about you that God tells me about you and about me, and it's that over time, if we would just be all into that and not give attention to our inner life, we would be in trouble, right? Because here's the thing about you. You are a person that's created in the image of God. You have a soul. You have a spirit. You have an inner life that needs attending to. And fortunately, the God of the universe looks at you and says, not only have I created all of this, but I am your Father through Jesus Christ, and I want to give attention to that inner life. I want to tell you who you are, and I want to tell you who I am, and I want to show you how to live life even when you don't have a $450 million contract, right? That's what God our Father wants to do. And I think this is the kind of thing that Jesus has been pushing us towards in the Sermon on the Mount, in the section where he talks about spiritual practices. So if you've got your Bible, take it and turn to Matthew chapter 6 again. The Bible's in front of you. It's on page 787. We've been looking at this section of Jesus' most famous sermon where he talks about these spiritual practices and the way the Jewish people that Jesus was speaking to thought about how they needed to connect with God and grow in a spiritual sense. And the heart of what Jesus is trying to give to us, the big picture of what he's saying, is that we pray to connect with the Father. That's what we're doing. We're praying. We're doing spiritual practices in order to be able to connect with the Father, to come into that space where you find out who God really is and you find out who you are. So we don't pray, and by the way, we don't attend church, and we don't get baptized, and we don't do communion, and we don't do confirmation, and we don't read the Bible for other people to show off before them or to show that we're really spiritual, and we don't do it because we have to or because we're forced to do it. We do it to connect with our Father. We do it to hear from him. We do it to see who we are. And what increasingly happens in our lives is that when we spend this time with the Father and we get to know who we are, we begin to see a congruence between who we are, what we feel, what we sense, what we think in our hearts, and the way that we live our lives. There's congruence. We're a whole person. What happens in that space is also this thing where instead of living our lives horizontally with like this very narrow view of just what's in front of me and the problems and the issues and the things that I have to deal with right here, I mean, those are significant things, but it gives me not just a horizontal perspective, but a vertical perspective that says there's a God of the universe, he loves me, I'm a part of the work that he's doing, and he has some things to say to me, so that as I go into all my relationships, my problems, and issues, God is walking with me, and he's giving me wisdom and guidance and direction and help, and he's showing me that this is ultimately about him and his glory and his power and his sovereignty, and you worship him, and he helps you, and he is with you, and then the horizontal begins to make sense. What Jesus is telling us is, look, prayer is where all that magic happens. That's where all of that takes place. And if prayer is this practice, this spiritual practice of coming to God to see who he is, to see who you are, Jesus actually gives us another spiritual practice to help us say no to other things so we can do that. A spiritual practice that helps us to deny the distractions and the things that might take us away from that time with God so that we can spend time with him. And that practice is called fasting. Fasting is what we want to talk about today. So let me start with this. Let me ask you a question. How many of you that are here that you've ever fasted in some way before? If you've fasted before, would you just raise your hand today? Okay. Now, unfortunately, you're going to get no spiritual reward because you raised your hands, but it helps me to see where we're at a little bit. I'm kidding, of course, there. But let's see what Jesus says about fasting in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 16. Jesus says this in verse 16, when you fast. Now, pause there for a couple of minutes because I know that's just 3 words, but there's some important things to note. What Jesus is doing here when he talks to the Jewish people is he's talking to them about the 3 primary ways they saw that they needed to connect with God in a spiritual sense. And you notice in Matthew chapter 6, he just walks through giving to those that are poor and needy, praying before God, and then fasting. And in each of those instances, he says, when you give, and when you pray, and when you fast. By Jesus saying when you do those things, that indicates to us that Jesus expects that we would utilize each of these spiritual practices, right? That we would give to those that are needy, that we would learn to pray, and that we would utilize fasting as well. However, he does say, you've got it completely wrong and it's all screwed up. So let me reshape it for you and show you how you should practice these things. Now, when Jesus gets to the section in verse 16, and he talks about fasting, the way the people would have understood this and what Jesus intended there was talking about fasting from food, or specifically withholding food from yourself in order to be able to connect with God. So that's specifically what he's talking about. Now, if we were to search the rest of the scriptures, we would find out that the primary reason for fasting is just that. It's to say no to something so that I can say yes to God and spend time with him. But throughout the rest of scriptures, we have at least a few other reasons that somebody might fast. You might fast for mourning, when you've had a loss, particularly the loss of a loved one. Maybe some of you've been in that place before where when you've lost somebody very close to you and you're in a season in your heart of lament and sorrow, you're like, I don't want to eat. I don't even feel like eating. And Jesus is saying that's an appropriate way sometimes to fast from food so that you can seek God and his help in the midst of your mourning. You might fast to repent of sin. Sometimes if God brings conviction into your life and you sense like, man, I've been going down the wrong path. I've been seeing this the wrong way. I've been practicing something that is against God, and God brings conviction. You might say, look, I need to be serious about this. I'm going to withhold food from myself so I can pray and really seek God to change me and help me to see his forgiveness and understand what he's doing with his grace in my life to transform me. So you might fast to mourn. You might fast in repentance of sin, and you might fast to seek God for something big in your life. You know, there's only actually 2 other instances after the gospel accounts where we hear about fasting in the entire New Testament. And so while prayer is greatly emphasized, we don't have a huge emphasis on fasting. I mean, Jesus says when you fast, so he expects we would do that. But the 2 instances we get are in the book of Acts, the story of the early church. And on 2 occasions, it says that the church was fasting and praying, and then God showed up and showed them something big he wanted them to do. One had to do with establishing the leadership in a church and commissioning those leaders. And the other was when the church at Antioch is fasting and praying before God, saying no so they can say yes to God. And as they do that, God says, we're going to start a missionary movement. I call out Saul at that time and Barnabas to be the apostle to the Gentiles to take the message of Jesus around the world, right? And so that's what happens. So you may fast to repent from sin. You may fast to mourn. You may fast when you're like, God, I need you. I need your help. I need your wisdom. I need your strength. I'm going to say no to this so I can have time to spend with you. So Jesus says, when you do this, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do. They disfigure their faces to show that they're fasting. So truly I tell you, they've received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head, wash your face, otherwise take a shower, clean up, so that it will not be obvious to others that you're fasting, but that it will only be obvious to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in that secret place, he will reward you. Now, this is basically the same thing that Jesus told us about the other spiritual practices, right? Don't do it for show. Don't do it for other people. Do it to actually connect in relationship with God, your Father. See, apparently people in Jesus' day, they did their fasting in order to gain approval from others. And if you're going to do fasting or any spiritual practice to get approval from others, other people need to know what you're doing, right? It's sort of like this thing we have in our culture today where when you go on vacation, you have to post a selfie, right? Or you have to post a picture. Because if you go on vacation and you don't post a picture to social media, the vacation doesn't count, right? You didn't really go. Especially if you go to the beach, you better sit in your lounger on the beach and get your feet in the bottom part of the picture and the ocean and the blue skies, or you didn't really go on vacation, right? You got to let other people know about it. And in Jesus' day, when people would fast, it's like we got to let other people know about it. So they would look sad. They would maybe look like they haven't eaten for a while. They might spread ashes on their face so that when they walk through the marketplaces where other people see, like, oh, that person's really spiritual. They're fasting. They're really connecting with God. Like they're really doing the thing. And people would kind of give them esteem because they were very spiritual people. I went to a Christian high school, and I remember in high school, we had one of our teachers was like just a very, very spiritual guy. And in fact, he was so spiritual that sometimes he would fast for like weeks at a time. But oddly enough, everybody always knew when he was fasting. And he didn't really hide it very well that he was fasting. And what Jesus says about this is, okay, if that's what you want out of it, that's what you get out of it. Other people's approvals, other people's looks, other people's admiration of what you're doing. But God isn't in that. And it's not what he has given you fasting for in the first place. Fasting is for you to connect with God. So Jesus says, take a shower, wash up, don't let on that you are fasting, and instead focus on your relationship with the Father because he's the reward. In other words, we could summarize Jesus' teaching on fasting this way. Instead of praying and fasting to gain approval, pray and fast to remind yourself of your approval from the Father. Think about how this might work for many of us. And I think we could take prayer, we could take fasting, and I'd go back to like all the other spiritual practices, attending church, reading the Bible, communion, baptism, confirmation, child dedication, whatever those things are that you think of, these are spiritual practices I should do. Our default setting for every single one of us is to do those to gain approval from yourself, to feel good about yourself. I've done the right thing. I feel good because I did the spiritual practice. Or to gain approval from other people so that other people in my life will say, yeah, you're a spiritual person. Oh, you're really right with God. Okay, good job. We really look up to you. You're a leader. You're a spiritual leader because you do these spiritual things. Or I try to gain approval from God. And that's one of the big ones. We think that if I do this for God, God should give me this in my life. Right? It's a transactional thing. If I pray, if I fast, NorthPoint is doing this month of practicing the presence of God, and we're doing half an hour time slots, and they've got a prayer guide, and they've asked us to sign up. So I'm sure if I do that for God this week, he should give me this in my life. Isn't that our default setting? We think that God will be happy with me, he'll be pleased with me if I do the spiritual things for him. So typically, we do our spiritual practices in some way to gain approval, the approval of ourselves, the approval of other people, or the approval of God. And Jesus is just blowing that out of the water, saying, no. That's not what spiritual practices are for. The spiritual practices are actually to remind yourself that you are already approved by the Father, that relationship is most significant and important in your life, that relationship gives you your identity, that because of what Jesus did for you in his life, death, and resurrection, you are a child of the Father. And prayer is the place, and fasting is a place where you remind yourself of that truth. So you could fast and pray to try to get something from God, or you can fast and pray because you have already received everything from God. And you come to that place where you say no to something so you can say yes to God, to remind yourself that everything you have is found in that relationship with him. I think about my daughters. Many of you know that I've got 5 daughters, and each of my daughters, by birth, have a place in my family, right? They don't have to earn that. They don't have to try to keep that. Our love for them is not dependent on how they act all the time and the practices that they do. Now, we might get upset at them sometimes if they aren't obeying and following what we've asked them to do. But they don't have to earn their place in our family. They have that place. You know what they need? They do need to be reminded of it. They need to be reminded of our love, of our affirmation, of our acceptance, that we are proud of them. They need to know that that is true. And the same thing is true of you in God's family. Jesus talks to us about spiritual birth, about being, in John chapter 3, being born again. In Ephesians, it talks about it being made alive by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. And when you have been spiritually reborn into the family of God, you have that place because of what Jesus has did. You don't have to earn it anymore. You don't have to earn the Father's love. And God's love for you is not dependent on your spiritual practices. What your spiritual practices are the place where you come back and say, wait, God, tell me who I am again. Tell me who you are again. Help me to live out of who I already am because of what Jesus Christ has done on my behalf. When Jesus talks to the people here, about this way they were using the spiritual practices to try to gain approval in some way, he helps us to realize something, that when we look at spiritual practices that way, the benefit that we get from it is very temporary, and it's very external, right? The benefit you get is short-lived. In other words, you have to keep earning it over and over again. You have to keep trying to attain it every single day. One of my favorite writers that helped form me when I was growing up was Jerry Bridges, and he talked about the performance treadmill. You got to keep running on that treadmill to keep getting your results. Or maybe you could think of it like Starbucks, okay? I imagine some of you like Starbucks, or just choose your favorite coffee place or your favorite drink place. My family likes this, and so imagine that you go into a Starbucks to get your iced caramel shaken espresso latte, cream, venti, whatever. The thing is that you do. I like the mango dragon fruit. Have you guys had the mango dragon fruit? One of the girls likes to get it with lemonade in there. Like, it's pretty good. There's little gibbets. That's a word that we made up in our family, gibbets. And there's gibbets in there that are really good to eat when you get kind of to the end of it. I like those things. And when I drink those, they give me a little bit of, like, maybe not lasting joy, but like joy. Like, I like it. It feels good. It tastes really good. But here's the deal. I have never gone into Starbucks and said, hey, give me my mango dragon fruit. Immediately, the barista would say to me, give me your credit card, right? Or give me the app where you're going to pay for this. I have to pay for that joy or that pleasure that I'm going to receive from the Starbucks. And you know what's going to happen by the afternoon? I'm going to be like, this is empty. I need another one of those things. Or when I wake up tomorrow, I'm going to have to spend another $15 to get one of those things, right? And it's endless. You have to earn it. You purchase it. And what you gain from it is enjoyable, but it's very, very temporary. Look, if we see spiritual practices that way, I endlessly have to earn this. I have to do this or else. I have to do this to get approval of myself, from God, from other people. It becomes all about you, and at the end of the day, it becomes soul-crushing. We're just seeing spiritual practices the wrong way. This is not, I do for God, therefore He does for me. That will crush your soul, and you can't keep it up forever. What if instead of that, you thought about what prayer and fasting is, a place for you to come to the Father who has an endless supply of iced caramel lattes and mango fruit? I just made one up. There's another drink for you, right? No, He has an endless supply of mercy and love and truth and hope waiting for you every day. And that prayer is not a way that you earn that love. It's a way that you remind yourself you already have that love. And fasting is not a way where you say, God, look how spiritual I am. Look how much I'm devoting to you. Look how much I'm withholding from myself to show how devoted I am to you. But it's a way for you to say, you know what? These lesser pleasures, these distractions, these things that are keeping me from you are not nearly as important as it is for me to see your love and your grace in my life. It's a mindset change. Verse 18, Jesus says, don't do your fasting to be obvious to others, but only to your Father. Because Jesus realizes again, I've told you in verses 1 through 18, no less than 10 times, Jesus says to you, this is your Father, this is your Father, this is your Father that we're talking about here. Jesus wants you to see the spiritual practices are not about the spiritual practices. They're about the Father who is unseen. And the one who is unseen is the only one who can care about your identity and who you are at the core of your being. The way often we practice these spiritual disciplines are about the external. What other people see, what other people think, right? God, the Father, is concerned with who you are at the core of your being. And that Father who sees what's done at the core, He will reward you. He will reward you. He will be with you. He will love you. He will speak truth to you. When you say no to some other things to say yes to the Father, you see and you receive what you truly need. And that's what fasting is. I know I've said this already, but let's just define it. Fasting is saying no to something so I can say yes to my Father. That's simply what it is. Saying no to something else, saying no to lesser things, saying no to distracting things, to say yes to God, and to exist in His grace, to be filled with Him. So let me ask you a question. Do you think that there is anything in your life that you need to say no to? Is there anything around you that you would say, that's pretty distracting? Or that's a mindless diversion? Or that's a temptation? Or you know what? That's even more than that. That's a potential addiction for me in my life. I don't know if I have any good examples of anything that might fit that category, but you probably have one in your pocket or your purse right now that could possibly, we're not legalistic around here, but that could possibly fit into this category that we're talking about here. I got some messages here. Maybe you should hold on. Actually, I needed to check the gram real quick. I had something I needed to do. You guys just wait a minute. Hold on. It's just going to be a little while. I'm only going to, like a minute. I gave myself like a 2-minute time limit, but probably about 45 minutes from now, I'll be like, I should probably get off of it. You know what I'm talking about? Are any of these things in your life competing with God? Like speaking to you about what you should think about yourself, telling you where you could find happiness, telling you what is true. And I probably don't need to spend a lot of time trying to convince you that the answer is yes. There's a lot of distractions and diversions that are out there, a lot of influences that try to pull us away from our Father. What I think we might not realize is how much each of those things are influencing us, how much those things truly are shaping what we think and what we feel and what we believe is true. So maybe think about it this way from another angle. Think about your spiritual life and your desire for God. How strong is that desire for God? Do you think in your mind, like, I know I should follow God, or maybe for a lot of you, like you were raised in church, you're raised in Christianity, so you have this sense of like, God is important, I should do that, but if you're honest with yourself, you're like, I don't really desire it that much. Like, I know I should pray, and this whole month that we're doing this series, it's like, oh, I'm just gonna feel guilty, and I should be a better prayer, I should spend more time with God, I should read the Bible, like I should probably fast. Now we're talking about fasting, okay, I probably should do that too, but you don't really desire it because you're tired and you're weary and maybe you're a little bit worn out. What do you do when you're tired and you're weary and you're a little bit worn out? What do you tend to go to? Do you tend to go to TV? We got to find a show to watch. I'm going to scroll on my phone. I'm going to eat something. I'm going to drink something to distract myself from like how I actually feel. I don't feel that great, and I got to get away from all of that. What do you go to? Now, does that help? Sometimes it does, right? At least a little bit. But I imagine it's probably short-lived. And so what many of us have done, we've got into this cycle of going to those things because maybe we're unmotivated or we're tired or we're busy and we need rest. But instead of those things lifting us up, they just perpetuate our problem. Have you ever binged watched a show before and woke up the next day and were like, I'm glad I did that. That was really good use of time. Like, I feel good. I don't have bags under my eyes. I don't feel like this, right? I feel really refreshed and renewed and ready to hit the day. Or are you like, that was probably about 5 too many hours that I spent doing that, right? There was an ebook that was written back in 2012, and it was part of a TED Talk as well. And the authors wrote this book called The Demise of Guys: Why Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It. The authors, primarily in the book, are taking on internet pornography and video games. And they're basically identifying those two outlets as approximately the same thing and the same effect on young boys' minds and hearts. But they tackle other issues in the book as well. And in one section called The Media Isn't Doing You Any Favors, they cite a study from the University of Maryland that concluded this: unhappy people watch significantly more TV. Unhappy people watch significantly more TV. Now, are people unhappy and therefore they watch TV, or does the watching of the TV make them unhappy? I'm not sure what the causation is, but the answer is probably yes. It's probably cyclical. I think it works together. People are unhappy, they watch TV, which actually they think is going to make them happy and give them some relief. It makes them more unhappy, and they get caught in a cycle with that. So the point is that TV, for them, video games, we could add the internet, food, buying stuff, social media, it's not typically giving us the wholeness and the happiness that we long for. And in fact, it tends to distract us from true wholeness and happiness. So the very things that we use to cope with life actually end up making it worse. And in the most desperate situations, they end up causing addictions and dependencies in us. So let me ask you, if at least some of that is true, wouldn't it be great if we had a tool to check this in our hearts? Wouldn't it be great if Jesus would have come up with a way to say to us, hey, maybe use this tool to just help you see. If you have some things in your life that are exercising too much influence and too much control over you, to see if there's some things that are distracting you from the fact that you're my child and I am your father and I have everything that you need in your life. To see if maybe our use of devices and food and drink and Amazon and entertainment is leading us down the wrong path. And friends, that's what fasting is. Fasting is a gift from God to help us check our use of things, often good things, to help us see if they have become the thing to us, the substitute that is actually controlling me and making me worse. Now, just calling fasting a gift doesn't make it easy. I'm guessing some of you maybe picked up on this. Jeremy, I saw what you did there. You're tricky, right? You're going to call fasting a gift to make us be like, oh, yeah, it's a gift that I receive, but it's still hard. And it is hard. It's hard to say no to things, right? Unless somebody is offering you Spam. That's probably not that hard to say no to that, right? That's an easy decision. But funny videos, right? That's a little harder to say no. Another glass of wine, that might be hard for some of you to say no to, right? But what fasting is, it is saying no to things that are good or okay in their own right. Can we talk about wine for a minute? We study the scriptures, we see that Jesus turned water into wine. That throughout the Bible, wine is a picture of abundance and joy and celebration. The Bible also has quite a few warnings about wine and the control that wine could exercise over our lives. So wine is not wrong until we use it to numb our pain or we become dependent on us. And in that case, then wine has been a substitute for God and it becomes your God. Food is good. We need it. God wants us to enjoy it. But when we use food to cope with life and we eat in excess or we go to it for our primary comfort, it has become a god to us. Our devices, they allow us to work and to create and to be able to connect. But that same device that allows for so much connection is also causing so much anxiety and addiction for people. It has become a god. And you just put anything else in that category: video games, books, clothes, music, shows. They're fine in their proper place, but they're poor substitutes for your Father. They can't love you. I think that's what we think, that these things will give me some sense of acceptance and freedom and joy and rest. And the problem is, those things in and of themselves, they can't do that. They only distract you from true rest in your Father. They can't bring you ultimate joy. And so we need something in our lives to help check this, to help check our hearts, to check their control over us, to pull us into the heart of the Father where true joy and happiness comes from. In other words, fasting is necessary for the greater reward. And it is a discipline. It is a choice. Not to gain God's favor, but to help you see God's favor. And Jesus says this to us: when you fast, don't make it obvious to others, but only to your Father. And your Father who sees what is going on in that secret place between you and Him will reward you. He is the place of ultimate fulfillment and happiness, the place of affirmation and hope. But He has competition in your heart. He has competition in my heart, competition with seeing things. And so we have to make that choice to say no to some things, to check ourselves. And that's what fasting is. It's about looking at your life and saying, hey, is there anything pulling me away from God? Is there anything distracting me that is not holding up its end of the bargain, where it tells me I'm going to feel really refreshed and renewed when I do this, and then I get done with it and I'm not? I don't actually feel that. Is there anything that's a diversion in my life? Is there anything actually that promises happiness but is keeping me very unfulfilled? Is there anything I should give up for a time to let the Father have more influence over me? So let me ask you, just to make it very personal, could you think about your own life right now? I imagine it wouldn't be too hard for you to come up with a thing or two that fits this category. And as you're thinking, don't think so much about bad things. That's another message. If you're thinking in your mind, yeah, I have looked at pornography and I have a struggle with that, or I'm taking illegal drugs, we're going to put those in a different category the Bible puts them in. That's called sin and complete rebellion against God. That's not good. And Jesus has grace for you, and He has forgiveness, and He has mercy, and He wants to help you heal from those, but those are things to be repented of. When we're talking about fasting, we're talking about something a little bit different. We're typically talking about good things. Things that are good gifts even that God has given to us or allowed us to have. Things, though, that you might go to for comfort instead of God. Or things that might distract you from dealing with problems that you have. You drink instead of dealing with the problem. You eat you watch a TV show instead of dealing with that issue. Or good things that you indulge in too much. Or a good thing that has become an idol to you. You have to have it. You have to do it. You have to buy stuff. It's been 2 days since I've been on Amazon. It's been 2 days since Etsy. It's been 2 days since Target, right? I have to do it. I'm getting a little fidgety here, right? Or I have to scroll. I have to get my phone. I have to see that. I have to have coffee. I have to have pop. I have to have caffeine. I have to have those things. It's those things. Those are not bad things. Those are things that are not wrong in and of themselves, but they become bad when they control you, when you have to have them. What good thing might be exercising too much control over you? Now, some of you might say, well, Jeremy, I don't really think they have that much control over me, and I know that if I wanted to give them up, I could give them up. And so you've kind of convinced yourself that I know we should fast, but maybe, you even said the New Testament doesn't talk too much about fasting, so I don't really need to do this because I know I could give the thing up if I wanted to. Here's what I would say to you, just prove it. Prove it, Prove it to yourself that you really can do that thing. And I think when you would try that, you would begin to see things about your heart. And you'll begin to see things about yourself. And I'm not saying it will be easy, but it will change you. You might find that this happens. As you give up something, you might find yourself getting grouchy. One of the best signs that it's something that you need to fast from and give up is that you get a little frustrated. You get a little agitated and irritated, even with the people that are around you when you give that thing up. You ever gone off caffeine before? You ever been on caffeine and you give it up? You get caffeine mean is what happens for at least a few days, and the headaches come, and they hit you, and you're like, I'm going to die. Do I have migraines? I think I'm having migraines. And it's just because you didn't have your Joe, right? You didn't have your coffee or your pop for a little while, and you go off that thing, and it starts to reveal, and you're like, why am I so agitated? Why am I so mean? Why am I so angry, right? That kind of thing starts boiling up in you, and it shows you things about yourself. God's speaking to you. He's working on you. He's pressing on you in those moments. There's all sorts of things that happen to us when we fast. So as you fast and you do that, let the cravings, let the anger, the frustration, the agitation push you towards God, because that's what fasting is for. You're saying no, and it's going to come with some degree of agitation probably, and let that agitation push you to say, God, I need you really bad right now. I need you. I need you to help me. I need you to calm me. I need you to strengthen me. I need you. Help me to see who you are. Use the fasting and all that comes with that to turn your heart towards God. So this week, I want to just ask you to do this. Would you be willing to try this out this week? Or maybe for some of you that you have fasted before, but maybe it's been a while and you're like, you know what? Yeah, I can think about something. I can do this. I can try this week. Our week of prayer started today at 12 a.m. this morning. You started praying. Our people started praying in 30-minute time slots. We have a prayer guide. If you haven't gotten one of those, I encourage you to pick one up or get it from the website. And I'm just going to ask you if this week you would pray. Whether you signed up for a slot or not, if you would take the prayer guide and each day that you would pray through that to connect with God. We've asked you to do this and engage with this. We're having a prayer service on Wednesday night. We encourage you to come out to that. And now I'm asking you, would you fast? Would you fast? Let me give you some directions on how you could do that. First, I want to encourage you to choose something to fast from. Okay, choose something to fast from. Pray to God and say, God, okay, what's the thing that maybe is a distraction, maybe is an influence, a good thing, but I could set aside for a time to see what that's doing in my heart so I could spend time with you. And so that might be food, right? That might be a particular type of food. It might be your phone. It might be certain apps on your phone. It could be TV, video games. Could be this. It could be always listening to music, talk radio, or podcasts, right? You know, some of you, we're like this, right? We have to have noise. It scares us too much when there's quietness. So whenever you're in your car, whenever you're working out, you're always either listening to music, you're listening to a podcast, you're listening to talk radio, and maybe it would be good for you for this week to say, you know what? I'm going to try it. I'm going to not do that. I'm just going to let it be quiet, and I'm going to try to pray and think, right? And you'll see how hard that is, but it'll be good for you, right? So just choose. God, what do you want me to fast from? And then secondly, decide the parameters. So think specifically about, okay, when and how am I going to do this? And so maybe if it's food, you're like, I'm not going to eat breakfast every morning. I'm just going to not do breakfast for the week. Or I'm going to take one whole day. I'm going to try to fast for the entire day or an entire 24-hour period. Or I'm going to not touch my phone from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock at night. Or when I'm home, at the home hours, I'm not just going to sit there and like scroll through stuff. I'm going to say no to that for that period of time. Or like I said, particular apps that I'm not going to do this week. Or I'm not going to play video games this week. Or I'm not going to play video games on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Or I'm not going to do TV all week. I'm not going to check messages. Here's one that some of you need. You're not going to watch cable news for the week. That is the Spirit of God speaking to you right now, right? Like, I don't care if it's Fox News or MSNBC or CNN. You're like, I just need to get out of that sphere of thinking right now and let God influence me more than all that. And you just sort of put that aside for a week. Here was a creative one. There was a kid that after the service said, hey, Pastor Jeremy, can I fast from school this week? I don't know. You can take that up with your mom, with that, and pray and see what God thinks about that. But I don't know. So choose something to fast from, decide the parameters, and then, it's obvious, but use that time to pray, right? The fasting is not about the fasting, right? I mean, we've got to choose to do it, but it's about the Father. So if fasting is really about the Father and your time with Him, you're turning your heart. Now, I know, like, if you choose not to eat food, the entire time you're not eating for a whole day, you're not going to be praying that entire time. But you could use a set amount of that time, maybe that you were going to use to prepare the food and to eat the food, to say, okay, I'm just going to pray during this time about these things or these people in my family or this situation that is going on. Maybe use the prayer guide as you do that and use that time to pray. And then lastly, and most importantly, post it to social media. I'm just kidding. No, cross that one out. We're not going to do that one. The first service got it right away. They just cracked up laughing. The rest of you are like, is he serious right now? We're going to do this? Like, this is, what kind of church is this? Yeah. No. So don't do that. But here's what I would encourage you to do is to talk about it with some other followers of Jesus in your small group, your discipleship group, your family and friends, and just talk together. Not to brag and be like, look at what I'm doing, but look, we are a family. And when Jesus taught us how to pray in the Lord's Prayer, he doesn't say you should pray my Father. What does he say? He says you pray our Father, which means there's brothers and sisters in Jesus around us. And one of the ways that we encourage each other and push each other on in our faith is to talk about how God's working in us. So talk about that. Say, hey, I feel like God's maybe working on me in this way. And then maybe as you do that fast later on, follow up with your people and be like, hey, this is what God did, and this was really hard, or this was really good, or God showed this to me, or he answered this prayer, or he worked in this way, or I'm still kind of learning how to do it. And I think we can come alongside of each other and encourage each other in this way. As we pray, as we fast, as we look to our Father together.